This is the main stage panel, which is Transformers in Healthcare, Patients and Their Caregivers. And I am pleased and privileged to announce this session because it's being moderated by dear friend and colleague, Sarah Krüg. And Ms. Sarah is the CEO and founder of Cancer 101, and she's the acting executive director of the Society for Participatory Medicine. And she has a history doing education for Pfizer and has done a lot of other very interesting things. So she's pulled together this panel, so give it up for Sarah, and let's do it.
Thank you. Good morning. Okay, so before I introduce our panel, I wanted to make a few announcements. So yesterday, alongside the Innovators Showcase, where different technologies were demoed, we actually had a silent patient Shark Tank in the front row. Patient caregivers were assessing these different innovations. Patient Shark Tank is a platform that was created a few years ago to amplify the voice of the patient, of the caregiver, in the design, the development, the enhancement of any innovation designed to serve them. And so we were secretly assessing, and Patient Shark Tank, the typical Patient Shark Tank, we use a 12-part co-designed scorecard to assess these innovations, and they distill down into a 3-part score around engagement, value, and credibility. We've evaluated innovations for academic medical centers, startups, payers, pharmaceutical companies, and so it was an honor to have our mini Patient Shark Tank here yesterday. We're also working on a virtual Patient Shark Tank to allow patients and caregivers to evaluate these innovations from the privacy of their own home. And so we're not sure if the innovator that's going to be awarded the most disruptive innovation is here today, but we did assess the 10 different innovations that were presented. And the first prize winner was Quell, which is a sensor that allows for chronic pain management. I don't know if Quell's here in the room today, but we do have a Patient Shark Tank award to present to them. And if they're not, be sure to stop by later or ping us to get your prizes. Thank you. And just to mention, Taito Care was second place. Another announcement I'd like to quickly make. So Magic Wand Project was something we actually talked about here on main stage last year. And the Magic Wand Project is essentially a project that's geared towards understanding what matters to patients and their caregivers, where we ask a question. If you could wave a magic wand and change one thing about healthcare, aside from making it free, what would you change? We've received over 4,000 responses to date. The survey's still open, magicwandproject.com. And there's actually a Charlie Brown tree in the exhibit hall where you could actually hang up your issue, if you'd like. You could write it down and hang it up on the tree. And the intent of the Magic Wand Project is not just to collect the things that you want to change, but also collect some of the solutions that are out there and start to do a bit of matchmaking. You know, these issues that are coming in, there are a variety of services, a variety of products that are out there to tackle those issues, but sometimes patients don't find out about them at the right time. And so the intent of this matchmaking, the intent of the Magic Wand Project, is really to start to align these solutions with the things that patients and caregivers want to change. So I encourage you to take a look at the magicwandproject.com. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panel, Transformers in Healthcare, Patients and Their Caregivers. So there is an evolution underway where the voices of patients, the voices of caregivers, are transforming the landscape as we know it. And they're not just sharing their individual stories, their health experiences. They're using what they learned from those health experiences, from that journey, to impact the lives of others that are following in their footsteps. And today we have 3 powerful advocates that are going to share their stories with you and what they've learned and how they're impacting the healthcare space. These are 6-word stories to introduce each panelist. So we have Tiffany Christensen, who's a double lung transplant recipient helping others. We have Janet Freeman Daly. She's NAD thanks to patient communities. And we have Anna Marie Serenen, how one baby is saving thousands. Now, to set the stage for the discussions that we're going to have here today, I'd like to share a few facts. Fact: 1 in every 100 newborns is born with a congenital heart defect, the most common and deadly of birth defects. Fact: 1 out of every 3 newborns with a serious heart defect was discharged undiagnosed until a few years ago. Fact, lung cancer is the #2 killer in the US. Fact, lung cancer kills more people annually than the top 3 other cancers, yet receives less federal research funding per death. Fact, medical errors are the #3 killer in the US, right behind cancer and heart disease, snatching approximately 400,000 lives annually. Fact, a 10-year study showed that 66% of medical errors were caused by ineffective team communications. Fact, 50% of doctors graduate in the bottom half of their class. That is a fact. Opinion, all ideas expressed here are my own and don't necessarily represent those of my employer. So I'd like to go ahead and introduce our panelists. Tiffany Christensen, she's a cystic fibrosis patient and professional patient advocate. As a national leader in patient and family engagement, Tiffany works to marry these 2 perspectives to create partnerships in care. Tiffany?
Thank you. Good morning. How are you? I'm super excited to be here. So let me go ahead and dive right in. I want to share with you this morning my story and a couple of key takeaways that I have come away with based on the things I've learned as a patient and as a professional working in healthcare. So I'd like to tell you my story. I like to call it a bird's eye view. Get it? It's like a bird's eye view, but it's supposed to be cute. Everybody is supposed to be, okay, it's too early for that. So I was diagnosed when I was 6 months old with what I consider to be the gift of cystic fibrosis. Uh-oh, my slides are advancing by themselves. I was diagnosed when I was 6 months old with what I consider to be the gift of cystic fibrosis. And I know that sounds weird because I'm sure you're aware of what CF is. It's a lung disease, it's progressive, there's digestive issues, very glamorous illness that I have. But I can honestly tell you, as young as 5 or 6 years old, I remember having a sense that this disease was not a mistake, that it wasn't a curse, that it wasn't something I should feel bad about, but in fact it was something that had been given to me on purpose. It was something that I was meant to learn from and to grow from. And I was pretty lucky. I did not have my first hospital stay until I was 12 years old. And let me just say this about that outfit. So that is not just a sweater. That's not just a sweater, everybody. That's a sweater dress, because that's the 80s, and that's how we did it, right? Anybody here rock that 80s poof that I have going? Okay, we have a lot of, I like to just brag for a second about my 80s poof. It was so hairsprayed with Aquanet that the boys in junior high like to throw coins at my head to see if they could get it stuck in the poof. So I made a lot of money that way. It was a very profitable hairstyle. Now, one of the things I like about this photograph is that when I was born in 1973, my parents were told that I would live to be about 8 years old. Now, last winter, I went into Macy's, and I discovered that they were trying to sell me a sweater dress. You all know what that means, right? When fashion comes back around in your lifetime, it means you're officially old, exactly. So that was the moment I knew I had made it, right? I had beat CF because the sweater dress was back in style. Now, it was back then that I had my first inpatient stay, 3 weeks of intravenous antibiotics, and my parents and I went into that environment in the way that I think a lot of patients and families do for the first time. We had no idea what to expect, and being a 12-year-old kid, I imagined it would be a lot like being in Hollywood and being in a day spa where all of these hot-looking doctors and nurses would be around me and massaging my feet, and I'd be eating delicious, nutritious foods, and I'd get all kinds of rest. And I learned really quickly that being in a hospital is not a lot like being in a day spa. I also learned that I had to become a participant in my care, and I also learned that there's a very fine line between being an effective patient advocate for yourself and an offensive patient advocate for yourself. So that has become my life's work, trying to figure out how do we help patients and families partner authentically in the team so that they can be effective in their advocacy role and not offensive. So we'll talk about some strategies for that. So by the time I was 21, I was pretty much sick all the time. I ended up soon after that being told that it was time to put me on a list for a double lung transplant. Because of the fact that I waited on the old system of lung allocation, I waited for 4 years for a call that they had lungs for me. And unfortunately, things did not go the way we had all hoped on the day that I got the call. The day that I got the call, we went outside the operating room with my family. Everybody was so excited. This was the day that I was going to be able to breathe. This was a huge, big day in our lives. So when they wheeled me into the operating room, everybody was jumping up and down and cheering. It was so exciting. They put me on that operating table. They put the mask over my face. They asked me to count backwards from 10. I think maybe I got to 9. And the next thing I knew, I was awake. But I had been really well trained by my team, so I knew that I was supposed to be in ICU and I was supposed to be intubated. But I was neither one of those things. I was actually back out in the holding area. I was tied down to a bed. I had an oxygen mask over my face, and I was having a really hard time breathing. Obviously, something had not gone well. My nurse came to my bedside. She touched me. She reassured me. My physician, my surgeon, came to my bedside, and he began to explain to me what happened that day. Now, you'll have to forgive me, I'm not clinical, so I'm going to explain this in layman's terms. But basically what he said was that they had begun the operation, so they made the first clamshell incision on my left side. They had pulled up my ribs. They were about to take out my lung when they got a call from the donor end of things that the cardiac surgeon had cut the tubing too short on the lungs, and they weren't usable. So at that point, they had to make a really tough decision, and they chose to close me back up and hope that I would be able to recover from being under anesthesia and all of that. So now what I understand, a couple years later, I learned that because of that event at my hospital, they no longer put potential recipients under anesthesia until the organs have been procured. And I don't mean to sound Pollyanna, but I'm grateful that I was the patient that was there to help teach that lesson that day, because I was able to survive in the process of doing so. But as you might imagine, on that particular day, I wasn't really thinking about safety protocols or anything like that. I was really thinking about the conversation I had with my surgeon. And really, I have to say that there's only one word to describe the way he spoke to us. He was simply humble. He came to my bedside. He apologized from the bottom of his toes. He did not try to deflect. He did not try to minimize. He did not try to avoid the conversation altogether. And it was because of the way he spoke to us that it was really obvious that this was almost as devastating for him as it was for us. And so because of that apology and his transparency, we were able to move forward from that place with our trust still intact. Now, I'm running out of time, so I'm going to go through the rest of my story pretty quickly. But after that, I did really well. I was able to recover after my double lung transplant on April 4th, 2000. I was healthy, I was puffy, thanks to all the steroids. And unfortunately, 2 years and 2 months after that, my double lung transplant failed, and I went into chronic rejection. I asked originally if I could have a second double lung transplant, and the answer to that question was no, that second double lung transplants don't have the same outcome as the first. But luckily for me, over time, that policy changed. And so because of my new lung transplant coordinator, who was blonde and perky and decided to advocate for me, I was able to be put on the list for a second double lung transplant and received that on March 28th, 2004. So how lucky am I? Almost 12 years post double lung transplant, second time around. And despite everybody's concerns, it was actually much easier for me the second time than the first. So everything has gone well. I decided when I was in ICU that I wanted to help other patients and families who were navigating this healthcare system. So I started speaking, writing books, and the most important thing I did was I joined the Patient Family Advisory Council at Duke Hospital. And I got really excited about the complexity of healthcare. And I decided that I wanted to work on this. So I eventually found myself having a position at Duke Hospital as a patient advocate. And I'm not going to lie to you, I thought I was going to be really good at this job. So I go in and I start working with patients and families. We're looking at complaints and grievances. We're trying to be more patient-family centered. Then healthcare reform comes along. Then our HCAP scores become really important to us. And then we have some budget cuts. And I started getting more risk management cases. I had to do really tough, unappealing things like trespass families from properties. I had to deal with a lot of people that were in a state of grief or denial or anger. And sometimes I found we could not always meet the expectations of the people we were caring for. So it didn't take me very long before I started to feel overwhelmed and exhausted and actually a little burnt out. And if you're getting mad at me, that's okay. I'm sure you're thinking, wow, you worked in healthcare for 2 minutes and you got burned out. But the reality is I'm going to say, yes, I did, because I thought that I was going to be so good at this position. But I really just felt like this little drop in a bucket that wasn't able to do a whole lot to help the patients and families that I was working with. And so one day, this all changed for me. I went to see a patient. He said to me, you know what? You all think that you're in the business of healthcare, but you would be wrong. You are in the business of communication. And that was the moment that it dawned on me. You know what? Not only is this man right, but this is something we can do something about. This is something I can wrap my arms around. So that was the day that I decided to pull myself up by my bootstraps and figure some of this out. So I'm going to share with you just 2 quick tools. I can't tell you why patient-family engagement equals Kelly Clarkson because I don't have time, but I'm happy to tell you later. So it's definitely a two-way street, this whole world of patient-family engagement, patient-family-centered care, patient activation. These are things that we have to continue to work to bring the team together. So I wanted to share with you two quick tools. One is the Platinum Rule. This helps our providers who are struggling with how to be more patient-family centered. What is patient-family engagement? So the Platinum Rule, if we know what the Golden Rule is, right? Do unto others as you would have done unto you. The Platinum Rule of healthcare says, do unto others as they would have done unto them. So if we carry around that very simple rule inside of our head, it makes it easier for us to co-design care, to ask our patients and families what their goals and needs are before we design a treatment plan, for example. So that's one tool. And the second tool actually is a video I want to show you in just 1 second. It's based on the Team Steps model. If you're familiar with Team Steps, you know it's a safety strategy. I love Team Steps. I'm a big Team Steps fan. And I would say that the one thing we could do with Team Steps is incorporate the patient and family into the team. So we're working on doing just that. So if we could show the video for our tool called CUS, which for providers, it is, I am concerned, I'm uncomfortable, this is a safety issue. So let's hand this tool to our patients and families, and we'll watch what that looks like on the video right now.
Oh, honey, I am so frustrated. I just don't think the doctor is listening to me. I really don't agree with his decision to change my medications while I am here in the hospital.
Well, you know what they told you to do in a situation like this, don't you, dear? They told you if you are feeling confused or frustrated, they wanted you to cuss at them.
Well, I do feel like cussing. Ha 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 ha.
Chuckle, chuckle, chuckle. Well, when Dr. Jackson comes in, you go right ahead and cuss, sweetheart.
Hi, Belle. How are you doing this morning?
Dr. Jackson, I am glad you are here. I need to cuss at you.
Okay, Belle. I am glad you remembered to cuss. Go ahead. I am listening.
I am concerned that you are changing my heart medication while I am here in the hospital. I am uncomfortable with changing the medication without talking to my cardiologist. He has been taking care of me for many years. It was hard to find the right medication and dose. I am scared about changing the medication. I have so many things happening with my health right now. If we change the medication, I might start having problems with my heart too.
Belle, thank you for cussing. What you're saying makes perfect sense. Let's talk about a plan that we can all feel good about.
Okay. So that's the end of my presentation this morning, but I do hope that we can continue to have these conversations during the panel about patient activation, patient-family-centered care, and patient-family engagement. What we all know is there's no such thing as a drop in the bucket when it comes to healthcare. All of us have huge potential for the ripple effect. So thank you all so much for your time and attention, and thank you for being ripples in healthcare.
Thank you.